Hello, I'm W.T. Edmondson, and welcome to Focus. Freedom often causes unbelievable silence. The aim of Focus, of course, is to educate, motivate, and increase public awareness on various issues that confront us: politics, social justice, community, and the aim, of course, is to promote our citizens to action. Well, you know, Missouri has been going through the fight to expand Medicaid for some time. And for whatever reasons, the Missouri legislature has chosen not to expand Medicaid. The impact of their decision is astounding. And so we have with us Mr. Bryant Smith, and he is with the Missouri Rural Crisis Center. He's going to talk to us a little bit about how that decision that the legislature make and have failed to make impact people in rural Missouri. Mr. Smith, welcome to Focus.
Thank you for having me.
Okay. Well, you've been over in the Capitol. I've been over in the Capitol, but our efforts in the Capitol have not been very successful. So tell us a little bit about yourself, first of all, and why you're in this fight for the state to expand Medicaid.
Great, sure. I'm with the Missouri Rural Crisis Center, and we are a statewide farm and rural organization. We've been around since 1985. We came together in response to the original farm foreclosure crisis. And since then, we've grown and evolved, and we work on a variety of federal and state type farm, agriculture, and rural issues. And so because of the profound effect and the profound problems with rural health care and the effect that it has on rural communities, that's why we've gotten into this fight to expand Medicaid.
You know, looking over the various literature, the quality of life of people in rural Missouri is impacted tremendously. Tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, in rural Missouri, of course, you know, the population in rural Missouri tends to be older, sicker, and they have less access to work-based health insurance. And so what we have found is, you know, prior to the Affordable Care Act, you had a lot of people having to go to the private market where they purchase high premium, high deductible plans that often have pretty sparse coverage associated with them. And so consequently, a lot of people were going without purchasing those types of plans, going without health insurance altogether. And so the result of that is that you have people who have not been, they don't have a doctor, they don't have a regular doctor, they are not getting on top of conditions, you know, that are developing within them, you know, in terms of, you know, getting on top of diseases they may be, fighting or that type of thing. And they're mainly availing themselves of the healthcare system through going to the emergency room, which is, of course, the costliest type of care that's available. And so what happened, you know, that's led to this healthcare crisis that's growing in rural Missouri was in June of 2012, the Supreme Court had two rulings on the Affordable Care Act, one of which was that states could either opt in or opt out of expanding Medicaid. You know, because what was supposed to happen was the states were supposed to expand Medicaid to 138% of the federal poverty level, and have those people on the Medicaid system, and then for people that were above 138% of FPL, they would then have different levels of subsidy as their income stepped up the ladder within the regular ACA plans. Well, when the Supreme Court gave the states that option to opt in or opt out, Missouri chose to opt out. And so that created a gap where you have people between 100% of the federal poverty level and 138% who are in this coverage gap, where, you know, where technically, as absurd as it sounds, they're too poor to qualify for subsidies for the Affordable Care Act plans, but they make too much to get on Medicaid, because Medicaid is one of the most, in Missouri is one of the most restrictive, where, you know, you have to be like 19% of the federal poverty level with kids in order to have a chance to get on Medicaid, and that's an extremely low amount of income. And basically, regardless, you could be making zero if you're single or you have no kids. You're not getting on Medicaid in the state of Missouri. And so there's this big gap of people, who are caught, in a really tough spot. Now, the way that translates to rural Missouri is that because you have a lot of people with lower incomes out there, they're caught in this coverage gap. Plus, you have, dish payments, that were being paid to hospitals that stopped in October of 2013. And what dish payments are disproportionate share payments, where when people go to the emergency room and they don't have health insurance and they cannot pay their bill, the federal government had, it would send money to these critical access hospitals and other rural hospitals to cover, some of those costs. Well, when the Affordable Care Act was assuming that all states would expand Medicaid, they said, well, we don't need dish payments anymore. And so even though states were opting out, the dish payments still stopped. And so that left, especially a lot of rural hospitals, with a shortfall, where they're not getting these reimbursement payments, but people are still coming into the emergency room. And so what you're seeing is we're starting to see rural hospitals begin to close and cut back on services. And so that has a tremendous effect on rural communities.
Question. A hospital in a small community, a rural community, when a hospital closes, it's not just impacting the hospital, because businesses in that area supply the hospital, so it's really impacting the entire communities, correct?
It does, because hospitals in a rural community or even in that surrounding county are a big deal. I mean, they provide jobs, and also they're ancillary businesses, medical supply places, pharmacies, that type of thing, that work off of that hospital system. And also hospitals, they invest a lot of times in the communities they're in terms of, building, in terms of services that are offered, things getting built in the community. They play a role in that. They're a part of the very fabric of the community, economic and otherwise. And so when a hospital closes, it takes a lot of jobs with it. It also really creates a public health problem, because in an urban area like St. Louis or Kansas City, well, it's always a shame when a hospital closes, but there are several other hospitals in that area that can pick up the slack conceivably. In a rural community, when a hospital closes, you go from having a hospital in your community to being maybe 50 miles away from a hospital. And so think about that in terms of, people having, sudden issues, car accidents, heart attacks, strokes, serious injuries, serious illnesses that require immediate attention, first of all, for a person to survive or have any chance at a reasonably good recovery. Well, if you're waiting, there was one example in Oregon County. We heard from an ambulance district director down there. And he talked about how his ambulances, he has 2 ambulances to serve the entire county, and how they're routinely driving 40-plus miles on country roads to respond to calls. So imagine someone lying on their living room floor with a heart attack, or someone in an overturned car in a ditch, seriously injured, waiting, someone to drive almost 50 miles, and not on interstate, on country roads, to get to them. That can definitely cut down the survival rate, that can cut down the chances of an adequate recovery or a full recovery. And so it really does create a public health hazard.
So what has the hospitals and the medical community been doing as a result of these hospital closing?
Well, what they're having to do is, one problem with rural hospitals being in a financially precarious position, I'll give you an example. There was a hospital in Mountain Grove, Missouri, in 2014 that laid off 60-some medical staff, nurses, technicians, that type of thing. Well, they are part of a hospital system that also has hospitals in Arkansas, a state which has expanded Medicaid. And so at the same time that the Mountain Grove Hospital is laying folks off, In the same hospital system in Arkansas, the help wanted sign is out. They're hiring people. So that shows the contrast. And so, healthcare professionals like doctors, nurses, specialists, technicians, they can see which way the wind is blowing. And if they're in a hospital or a hospital system that is cutting back on services or debating about whether or not to close, it can lead to a talent drain because they see Arkansas has expanded Medicaid, Kentucky has expanded Medicaid, Illinois, Iowa. They can easily move to one of those states where the pastures are greener and get a more secure job. And so we're beginning to see some of that as well. And yeah.
So when a hospital closes, that means the medical personnel lose their job, other personnel move to greener pastures. So that leaves a tremendous void as far as medical care in the rural community. So what's happening with those individuals now that no longer has that resource?
Well, they're in a tough position. They're in a position where, if your nearest hospital is 40 or 50 miles away, well, like we just talked about, response times for emergencies are going to be longer. And think about, and as I said, rural populations tend to be older. And so you have folks, as they age, being forced to just, to see a doctor. Imagine having to drive 30 to 50 miles. Just for a routine doctor visit, doesn't have to, just to keep your medications up to date, that type of thing. And then imagine, having to drive, like in the wintertime, driving on roads that can be wet or icy or snowy or that type of thing. That can be a significant inhibitor, especially to older folks, right. Trying to get that care. And also just to anyone at any age, when you know that you're going to have to tie up half your day or maybe your whole day just for a simple doctor's appointment, you are much more likely to just put that off.
Right.
I'll walk it off, it'll go away eventually. And then, next thing you know, you're in the back of an ambulance, because it's progressed to a point that it's gotten out of control. And then you're going to need more catastrophic emergency type care. And so, yeah, it has a ripple effect that can affect people's lives and families. If you have a family member who's going through a catastrophic injury or illness and recovery period, the financial strain, it can be tremendous when you don't have health insurance, driving people into bankruptcy, having, causing extreme financial distress. And so, it affects everyone in rural communities.
So what can Missouri do to close the Medicaid gap?
Well, the first, glaring thing that can be done is for our legislature, to expand Medicaid, to get upwards of 300,000 more Missourians covered. And, because it's true, people are interacting with the health system, in emergencies, because, some critics say, well, people are, those 300,000 are interacting with our healthcare system. And the answer to that is yes, they are. That is true, but they are interacting with it in the most costly way possible on a number of fronts. In the emergency room, you go in there for anything, minor or major, it's going to be costly, to deal with it. But a lot of times when people end up in an emergency room, it's because they have a health condition that is, needlessly progressed. If they had a relationship with a doctor, a lot of these things can be managed or headed off.
So when we're talking about the 300,000, if we're talking about the benefit of closing that gap, is that just are they the ones that simply benefit? Or is there an offshoot?
Well, no, there's always, having a more robust health system in our state. It's of all the things I was telling you, talent drain, people, healthcare professionals going to other states or doing something else for a living, or communities, losing a huge economic driver in their community. You just reverse that. When you have a more robust health system, It will create jobs. You know, there are varying estimates about exactly how many jobs. I'm not going to get into that because, you know, I've seen different studies project different, you know, but the fact that it would, you know, make hospitals closer to financially whole again, or not in the position where they feel that urgency to cut services or possibly close their doors. And so, you know, that's going to create a more vibrant rural economy in these areas. And also, you know, when you have more people with access, you know, to have a relationship with a doctor, to stay on top of their health conditions, you have a healthier and more productive population, people who aren't going to miss as much work, people who aren't going to have to stop working altogether because their injury or illness, you know, put them onto disability, that type of thing. And so it is, you know, it's the reverse. I've been talking about the negative ripple effects of not having it. It's the reverse of that. You know, it gets us moving in the right direction instead of the wrong direction.
As you have had conversations with legislators, what's their conversation like?
Well, the main argument against that you'll hear time and again in our legislature is that they have the impression that Medicaid is broken, it's a broken system, and you're basically, you know, throwing money down a sinkhole. You know, that you know, and you know, it started off that they weren't sure that the federal government would come through with the matching funds that were promised. Well, they've kind of, you know, their arguments have evolved over the years, and now it's more, you know, some of these philosophical things about how it adds to the national, you know, they think they're contributing to the national debt, and that Medicaid is this terribly broken system that must be completely reformed, you know, but they're very sparse on specifics. You know, it's a lot like a lot of the people who talk about repealing and replacing the Affordable Care Act, or i.e. Obamacare, as critics like to call it. You know, they're almost everyone who talks about for repealing and replacing or reforming a broken Medicaid system, it's a very nebulous thing they're talking about because they don't have any specifics. Okay, where is Medicaid broken? What are the examples? What can be done to fix it? What can be done to fix it at the federal level or at the state level, that type of thing? What exactly do we need to do? Not just this, it's broken and someone needs to fix it. And what does a so-called fixed system look like?
Right.
A lot of them can't even tell you that. And so I think a lot of it is more, you know, political ideology and philosophy, you know, than hard facts.
What can citizens do?
I think the main thing that we always encourage folks to do in rural Missouri is talk to people, talk about it. You know, talk about what's going on in your rural community. Do you have a hospital? Is your hospital in financial trouble? Has your hospital turned into basically a big urgent care? You know, talk to your neighbors, talk to your coworkers, talk to the people you go to church with. You know, because, you know, before we can really go to legislators and force, you know, people have to be educated about it and understand, oh, you know, I'm concerned our hospital may close. They need to understand why that's happening. It's not just, you know, one of those things. You know, there's a reason why hospitals are in dire financial, you know, trouble. And that our legislators here in Missouri, while, you know, expanding Medicaid isn't a panacea, there's always going to be some problems in some segments of it, but, you know, it would be a huge improvement, you know, over what we have right now. So, you know, people need to talk to their neighbors, friends, coworkers, and then go to their state legislator, state representative, their state senator, and say, look, keep our hospital in our community, or keep our hospital doing what a hospital is supposed to be doing and not just becoming an emergency room only, or an urgent care. You know, our community needs and deserves better than that.
It sounds as though legislators are making a calculated decision that collateral damage on some folks are okay. You know, that we can discount this because you know, one life is loss is too many. But when you're talking about 300,000 people who are without that multiplies itself over and over and over, as you indicated, because as you end up with a small problem, that problem magnifies itself, and now it's a large problem. And the cost is going to be far more to get taken care of. Logically, it just doesn't make sense that legislatures would be thinking on this line. I always kind of attribute this to this. I don't know whether you recall when Missouri highways were terrible. Okay, and they were talking about how bad Interstate 70 was. But no one wanted to do what needed to be done to get it fixed until it was so bad that they had to. And once they did what they needed to do, the highways was great, people were traveling, no problem, you didn't hear the conversation anymore. So, it appears that it's just a decision being made that we're going to do it.
Indeed. And when you look at how the legislature has performed in the last few years, as you recall, a while back, a couple sessions ago, they passed a big tax cut that's going to hit in fiscal year 2017. So when you're talking about roads, and when you're also, not so much Medicaid expansion, because that's a federal program that would have federal matching funds of, even now, would be over 90% would be paid by the federal government and less than 10%, and ultimately no more than a 90-10 split. But one thing I am finding on issues is, when people talk about services and infrastructure and things like that, one thing they say is, well, they do this big tax cut a couple years ago that's going to go into effect this year. Well, now, then they use that to cry poverty and say, well, the money's just not in the budget. We can't fix roads, or we can't work on our rural health care system, or our urban health care system for that matter, and because the money's just not there. Well, the money's not there because you cut it,
right?
And so to tell people, the citizens of Missouri, for instance, that you need to pay a higher sales tax to fix the roads, well, maybe you should have thought about that when you were cutting the budget 2 years ago. That's just a thought.
Yeah. Let's talk about comparison here. You provided a tremendous chart here. The national picture versus Missouri. Where did it stack up? I mean, it doesn't seem to look that great.
No, not at all. I mean, when you're looking at, especially in rural communities, you look at states that have expanded Medicaid, and you look at states that haven't, and where they are. And Missouri does not stack up very well at all. And when you look at rural counties, you'll see, it's bad all over rural Missouri without Medicaid expansion, but southeast Missouri, the Boot Heel area, is absolutely devastated by it. Oregon County, that ambulance director that testified before an interim committee about how his, he used to have 3 ambulances, now he's down to 2, and now they're driving 48 miles for calls, that type of thing. Southeast Missouri is one of the poorest regions of our state, and they're some of the ones that are the most profoundly affected, because even the hospitals, that are still down there, a lot of them are running into that having to cut services type of thing, where, you can talk to folks in the Boot Heel. I read a newspaper article, where they were talking about their hospital, and they were just like, if anything serious happens to me, send me to Memphis. So it shouldn't be that way.
Yeah.
But, people should have enough confidence, in the healthcare system should be robust enough, to where people have confidence that if they get sick or injured, that their needs can be met. And so getting back to your core question there, no, Missouri isn't stacking up well, because we are part of the states that haven't expanded Medicaid do not stack up well versus states who have.
And looking at the stats on on ethnicity and race, it's amazing how you look at how it's impacting different groups at different rates, and it's not surprising, because that's across the board when it comes to it. But when you really look at it, minorities are usually in a lower category economically, job-wise, and so they're going to be impacted more severely. And so when you look at how this is impacting, and of course, looking at that age-wise, what do you say about that when you're looking at the rural area? You said that is usually older.
Yeah, older, an older, sicker type population, and again, not having that access, or less, to work-based health insurance. You have a lot of small businesses, you have farms, you have that type of thing, where it's not, in some cases, the working arrangement that you would be accustomed to in an urban area, where you have major companies and that type of thing that have that offer health care, as part of their benefits. And so even though the health care may be substandard, you'll find that people in rural Missouri very often were stuck on the private market and then end up getting these high premium, high deductible plans that really don't have very good benefits. And so they were saying, well, it's really not covering much, and I'm having to pay a lot out of a high deductible or high true out of pocket. So I might as well just take my chances and just, maybe eat better or, and hope for the best. Yeah. And so a lot of people going without.
So what kind of collaborative efforts have been, is being made across the state to try to galvanize groups such as yours with similar organizations to try to, I don't want to say pressure because it seems like nothing pressures the legislature in this state, but how to possibly influence the population to rally and put pressure on the legislatures?
Well, statewide, there have been groups like that we've been part of, like the Missouri Medicaid Coalition, which really is a remarkable collection of different types of organizations. You have the faith community represented, labor, economic, social justice, economic type groups are represented in, covering a wide range of policy areas. And of course, the health field, a lot of the health organizations have been heavily involved in that and working together and trying to educate people. Like as far as we go at the Missouri Rural Crisis Center, one of the big things we're trying to do is get people informed and educated on these healthcare issues in their communities and help them understand, as I was alluded to earlier, why the hospital in your community is closing or why it's in financial distress. It's not just an isolated incident. It's not just a case of, sometimes people assume that mistakes were made or that type of thing. In some cases that may be true, but by and large it has to do with losing those dish payments, lack of Medicaid expansion, or catching these rural hospitals in a really tight squeeze, financial squeeze.
And so you're talking about not only the health and welfare of citizens in rural Missouri, but you're also talking about the economic piece as well.
Yeah, for us, the economic piece is a lot of what we talk about, because there are probably other voices, from the faith community that can talk about the moral, impact of it. And so we mainly talk the economic side of it, not just, from both a personal, what not having health insurance or not having adequate health insurance can do to your personal finances, if someone gets sick or injured, but also as a community, when a hospital has to lay off healthcare professionals, whether through cutbacks or through closing, and how that, a lot of times these people end up leaving those communities altogether. They move to an urban area or they move to another state, to pursue their careers. And rural communities lose out every time that happens, and so, so that's why we look at Medicaid expansion and other healthcare related issues as so urgent for rural Missouri.
Well, in closing, first of all, I'd like to thank you for the work you do in coming to share on what's going on in rural Missouri. In closing, tell our viewers how they can contact you if they have issues or concerns that they wish to communicate?
Oh, certainly. There's a number of ways to get in touch with us. You can, contact us directly. You can, our phone number is 573-449-1336. We also have a website, www.morural.org. You can sign up to get involved, or you can send us a note, that type of thing. We also have a Facebook page. You can look us up under Missouri Rural Crisis Center, and we're also on Twitter at Mo Rural. And so there's a number of ways to get in touch with us. We would love to talk to you. We would love to hear what's going on in your community, and any way that we can help, educate folks, inform folks as to what's going on, and most importantly, what they can do moving forward.
Okay. Well, thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you for joining us and tuning in. As you just heard, rural Missouri is suffering. But the fact of the matter is the state of Missouri is suffering because the legislature has basically decided to make a non-political issue a political issue. Lives are at stake. Lives have, in fact, been lost because of the decisions that our Missouri legislatures has made. We ask you right now to get on the phone, stop by their office, pound their desks, do whatever you can, because with each and every day, lives are being lost because legislators are making a non-political issue a political issue. We'll see you next time. God bless.